Welcome everybody to Vernacular Verbose, Jethro Tull podcast. We're continuing our deep dive of the Tull discography. Today we're talking about Aqualung, the biggest album in the band's career, and the one that has achieved, I think, the most legendary status among sort of the casual mainstream music audience. Eugene, I kind of want to open today just kind of giving it to you at first. What are your main impressions when you think of this album?
Well, I think my first listen of Aqualung was... It wasn't definitely one of my first Tull albums. Those were Benefit and War Child and Too Old to Rock and Roll and Stormwatch. And then from one of his business trips, my dad brought a tape. I think it was an Italian issue made in the 90s of Aqualung. And I listened to that. And I think it was in winter, and it was quite cold and sunny. And that image... together with the lyrics from Aqualung, December Foggy Freeze and Sun Streaking Cold, it kind of cemented my associations with the album as a winter album. I don't know if that makes sense. It probably doesn't to anyone else but me. But that is the kind of thing that Aqualung brings up when I think about it.
That's awesome. I can't really say that I've ever thought of it as a winter album, but I think one of the best things about music is making memories your own with different albums. So different albums and songs that when you play them, you immediately recall some kind of environment or time. So that's really cool that that's kind of what this album means for you.
Yeah, because it is super subjective, of course. And I'm not saying that it is the meaning of this album for me, but this is the kind of period in life, late 90s, when I listened to it for the first time, and this is a strong association. Musically, when I think of Aqualung, I always think the first thing I actually think about is the piano, because to me, this album kind of feels exemplar in using piano to drive rock music, and I think the use of piano gives this album a bluesy feel more than anything else, more than the musical devices, the harmonies, the melodies, and so on. It's just that sound of piano that is really prominent and in some cases more important for the heaviness of the feel than the electric guitar.
Yeah, I've never considered that before. I guess when we bring up kind of the member lineup for this album, there's a lot that we can mention, and the piano is definitely a big part of that. So for the member lineup for this album, we have Ian Anderson, vocals, flute, acoustic guitar, Martin Barr on electric guitar, Jeffrey Hammond on bass guitar, Clive Bunker on drums, and John Evans on piano. So John Evans, this is the first time, he was on Benefit, but this is the first time that he was considered an official member of the band. And as you said, the piano sort of increased, I guess, in importance along with his official status as a member of the band.
Yeah, it does make sense.
So a couple other important things to mention with the lineup. Jeffrey Hammond comes in for the first time. So Glenn Cornick, who had left, was fired rather at the end of the Benefit tour, replaced with Jeffrey Hammond. Eugene, I'm curious to hear sort of your perspective on Jeffrey, because as has been sort of repeated a couple of times before, Jeffrey was not a musician, and he still doesn't consider himself a musician. He was basically taught how to play bass just in order to play on this album. And he was really only brought in because the other guys liked him.
It kind of feels wild that Jeffrey was specifically taught bass before recording, while recording Aqualung. And yeah, it is one of the things that Ian Anderson mentioned several times, that they taught him to play bass, and after he learned it, he barely ever made mistakes. He always plays perfectly, and that is kind of feels phenomenal to me, which means that Jeffrey had a lot of talent. I mean, talent is again quite a subjective term, and sometimes people overestimate talent, because talent actually needs a lot of hard work to be turned into a skill. But you can't deny that a person who was taught bass a few months before and then recorded Aqualung is a very talented guy.
Yeah, it's particularly crazy to me that they would do that, because it's not like they were a small band still at this point. I mean, they were a big, important band, after Stand Up. And so it's pretty interesting to me how they would just, for their next bass player, they would just get a friend of theirs who isn't really a bassist and just decide on him.
Yeah, well, maybe shows that they weren't really taking themselves seriously.
Yeah. The last notable thing to mention in the member lineup is that this was Clive Bunker's last album on drums.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading an Ian interview somewhere where he mentioned that Clive was kind of checked out by this point when they recorded this album, and that he wasn't really giving it his all anymore on this album. And I can kind of see what he means in the playing, where a lot of the playing on this album feels a lot more restrained than I think Clive's usual is. Do you agree with that?
I do, but I also feel that the drumming has somewhat more weight to it on this album. It is less Clivey and less jazzy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's very weighty.
I had always chalked some of that up just to the way it sounded. I assumed that something about the kit he was using or the way they mic'd it or produced it, that he sounds kind of less trashy than he did before.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in like a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
Just his kind of like classic, like trashy sound is kind of gone on this album. It sounds a bit more, like you said, weighty.
Also, I think it was probably mic'd a little differently, because what Terry Ellis mentioned when talking about the producer, when talking about the album, is that Ian Anderson wanted the backing track, the bass and the drums, to be dead as a dodo, with no reverb on it, no space whatsoever, just very, very close mic'd, dead sound.
Yeah, I've never read that before, but that's really interesting because it's correct. I mean, there's no reverb on the drums on this album, from what I remember.
Mm-hmm. And probably no room either, or very minimal, which gives that less of that, in quote-unquote, trashy feel.
Mm-hmm. So Clive left the band after the tour for Aqualung because he wanted to get married and start a family and was kind of done with the touring life. And then, of course, was replaced by Barry Barlow, who was a very different drummer and who I'm very excited to talk about in our next episode. So my kind of general take on this album, just when I think of Aqualung, it's a really difficult album for me to talk about just because its whole legacy is being the big Jethro Tull album, like the big popular mainstream one, and the one that is sort of, I guess, most relevant for like the mainstream casual music world. So in that respect, it's always difficult for albums and songs like that are super popular and that are played a lot for me to really know what to say about them, objectively speaking, because I don't really know how I would react to this album if I heard it for the first time today, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah. I totally get what you're saying about it being difficult to talk about these songs.
Yeah. And it's also, I think we should talk a bit about how this was received in the music press, because that was it defined a lot of the discussion of this album even today. So, for example, there's two things in particular, which is that the first one that's been written, discussed a lot kind of in the Tull fan community is how the critics labeled this a concept album at the beginning, which Ian very vehemently disagreed with.
Yeah, that's right.
And the second being that this was the first progressive Jethro Tull album, and that's still something that I hear people say today. Now, that's something that I've never really agreed with. I don't really see where that comes from, but what do you think?
Well, it is sonically more diverse than Benefit, and then I can see where the progressive label here is coming from. And it does employ some very unexpected musical techniques, which I will talk about later in the discussion, particularly in songs like Mother Goose or Up to Me.
Yeah.
Or Wind Up, for that matter. Or Slipstream. I mean, it's all over the album.
Yeah.
And progressive was still a loosely defined term at that time. So, yes, the album doesn't sound like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or Yes, but it was still a part of that thing that was happening in rock music at the time.
I guess to me, it's just like Tull's progressive period to me begins with Thick as a Brick. And to me, Aqualung has like never been part of that conversation for me personally, but maybe I'm missing something. There is one track on Aqualung which I think gets into progressive territory, which we'll talk about later. But I think for the most part, it's never struck me as a progressive rock album. So I've always kind of disagreed with that consensus that I seem to see.
I see. Well, I mean, it's just labels, really. And the meaning we assign to them. So I think it's just that you assign a specific meaning to the term progressive that you are not finding in Aqualung, while other people will have another definition.
Yeah.
Because even if we open up an encyclopedia or prog archives, there's still discussion.
The more I think about Aqualung, what it feels the most like to me, like in relation to other albums in the discography, is it almost kind of feels like a sequel to Benefit to me, like a Benefit 2.
Really?
In the sense that, not necessarily the tone, I don't know, but just the fact that it's an album that's very much composed of electric songs, heavier electric songs, and acoustic songs. And to me, it shares a lot of that with Benefit.
I see what you're getting at, but to me, I will disagree with that, because to me, the important part of Benefit is not of what elements it consists, but of how these elements are employed. And to me, the kind of main part of the Benefit sound is how jammy it is, and how much improvisation there is. Mm-hmm. While on Aqualung, there is none.
Yeah, I see that. Something about it to me, I guess my mind is like trying to tie it to something else in the discography, because I guess I always kind of have viewed it as like existing on its own, but I guess I'm like trying to find a link to some other part of the discography, and I think Benefit would be like the closest thing.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but it definitely is on its own, like in between Benefit and Thick as a Brick.
Yeah.
It is an album of its own, a league of its own, and should be discussed on its own terms.
So the cover art for this album is, of course, one of the most famous Tull cover arts.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't really have a lot to say about it. I think it's fine. You know, I know there's been kind of a lot of brouhaha over the years about the character on the front looks like Ian, and Ian didn't really like that.
Yeah, that's true. Ian didn't really like the cover art, period.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bare, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's fine enough. I don't really care for it one way or the other, to be honest.
Yeah, I know. I think the cover, the important part about the cover is how much of a kind of a Dickensian tinge it lends to the entire album, to the way the album is perceived. Mm-hmm. So that's what makes the cover important for me. But I agree, it's not my favorite cover art in the world.
I think maybe the more interesting part of the cover art, I don't remember if this is the back cover of the or the inside, but there's like the same painting of the band members in the church.
Let me check that painting. Oh yeah, I think it's the inside.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is the inside. Yeah.
Yeah, that was always interesting to me. And I kind of wonder if that would have made a better front cover.
Maybe not. Maybe it would have been too in the same vein. Maybe they wanted to make a cover like that and made Minstrel in the Gallery.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe the most important thing that it sort of contributed to the band long term was actually the medieval font that it used, just because that was something that kind of came to be important for like the branding of the band later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be, even though I don't think there's another album with a medieval font. Black letter. I might be mistaken, but off the top of my head, I'm not really remembering another one. Maybe .com.
Yeah.
So I actually wanted to talk a little longer about how it was perceived as a concept album. And my take on that is, methinks Ian doth protest too much. Because it has the elements that explain this perception. There's that gospel excerpt on the cover. In the beginning, man created God. That ties in with the title song. And then the character in the title song is referenced again in Cross-Eyed Mary. So we've got characters jumping from song to song. We have lyrical themes repeating, songs about characters, songs about street life, and then songs about religion. And in between of them, in between them, songs about life and Locomotive Breath that kind of sums up that the theme of life. We have short musical interludes that contrast with the larger and louder songs that also give it theatrical sort of feeling. There are musical devices repeating in different songs, such as musical collage elements, random sounds inserted, like laughter or humming. And many of the songs on the album have sort of a feeling of watching a performance. It's not quite theatrical, it's not quite breaking the fourth wall, but I kind of, when I listen to some of the songs, I feel like I'm listening to a song played in a specific setting. And the album kind of cinematically takes us from scene to scene in that way. It's not just the lyrics and not just the arrangement. It's the extra elements in the music that give every song the feeling of a different scene, of a different place. And I totally agree that Ian didn't intend it with a concept in mind. And that is why he vehemently disagreed. But it feels to me like his reaction is more along the lines of, you think that was concept? That's just what I think a good album should be. If you don't make them like that, you're just lazy. Just you wait, I'll show you a real concept album. And then he did.
Yeah, I think Ian's point was that there wasn't a story to it, I think is what he was trying to say. And I mean, there's, even today, like when you talk about a concept album, there's kind of two groups of people when it comes to the definition. So, some people think that a concept album is like an album with a defined story with a beginning and an end and characters. And others think that a concept album is just an album that has like a concept or, themes, a consistent theme to it. And so I think critics were trying to say that this was a concept album in the latter sense, that it has themes of religion to it and that kind of thing. And I think Ian was saying the former.
Yeah, like with progressive rock, again, this is a discussion about definitions.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree it's not a concept album. I'm the kind of person who tends to agree that a concept album is like, it needs to be like more strictly defined as a story per se, which I think things like Thick as a Brick and Passion Play are more like that. Thick as a Brick is kind of more abstract, but still. Okay, track 1, Aqualung. So this is, when I talk about the album and how it's hard to talk about it, this track in particular is kind of the epitome of like that kind of feeling for me, where it's hard to talk about, because this is like the huge massive song that by far the biggest Tull song, and I've heard it so many times that I don't really know how I feel about it, as weird as that sounds, and it's a song that I wish I could hear for the first time today so I could actually know what I think about it objectively.
Oh yeah, I know. I also find it kind of hard to talk about, so I made notes about things I noticed and just random recording and random notes about the recording and the parts. For example, in the drum part, in the intro, there's the double stroke on the toms.
Yeah.
That kind of creates an echo effect.
Yeah.
So even though there's no reverb on the drums and they are quite dead, meaning that the sound has no reverberation and no space to it, but these double strokes give it an echo effect and makes it sound like larger than life still, even with that sound. And the fact that it's very recorded with a lot of punch, it actually increases that effect. And I think we will find that double tracking, well, it's not double tracked in this case, but the double tracking effect to give an impression of an echo is utilized all over the album for different instruments. So this is a kind of studio trick that is used on the album.
Yeah, if I can get on my drummer box for a second, I think it's a crying shame that the drum part on this song isn't sort of considered like a classic drum part, because those two tom notes that you're talking about are like, it's such a weird part. And it's one of those like classic Tull drummer things where it's just a really weird part that I think most drummers would never think to play on a song like this. But it defines it so well, and so I think it's sad that he doesn't really, on a song that's as huge as this one is, I think it's kind of sad that drum part doesn't get more attention.
I don't think Tull drum parts get a lot of attention, period.
Yep.
I don't think any of them are considered classic, which is a great shame.
Yeah, outside of like a close circle of like prog drummers, I think they're not very well known.
Do you think that this drum part is not very characteristic of Clive?
I do actually, and not so much that part we're talking about, the tom part, but I mean when it gets into like, particularly in the bridge, I guess, like the long bridge with the solo and stuff, it's quite standard. It's just kind of a ride snare pattern, which I think is a bit uncommon for him and how standard it is.
Maybe that was something that Ian wanted for that, or maybe it was Clive getting sort of tired.
Yeah, it could be.
From recording.
One of the first things that this song kind of strikes me as is that it's very ambitious compared to what came before it. And so in that sense, I guess that's kind of where some of the progressive concept album thing comes from, is that a song like this, it sounds much bigger and more ambitious than the albums that came before it.
Yeah, and it is definitely a sort of less standard. It's got lots of unexpected sections, and it's not what songs were like at the time, which is also the pouring the oil onto the progressive fire. I think a YouTube music theorist 12-tone analyzed it and actually made an argument that the intro part is actually atonal because it cannot be analyzed in a specific key and explained consistently. it is sort of all over the place, so it is atonal, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I never knew that. That's cool. I guess like one of the main ambitious things besides the length of it is just the contrast between the electric and acoustic parts, which it kind of strikes you at first listen as kind of an interesting thing that they went for, where they go immediately from sort of like the big electric riff to the quiet chorus parts, and even especially kind of accentuating it with the vocal effect on the acoustic part. Which what do you think about that, by the way?
I think that vocal effect really solidifies the winter and frost association for me.
I agree.
Because it kind of sounds cold and distant.
Yeah.
I also on that acoustic part, I'm not sure it's the chorus. It's just a section in this song. The bass part that Jeff is playing, it's kind of busy for what it is.
Yeah.
And then it's played again in the fast section. And it sounds practically, well, doesn't sound the same, but it's the same notes. And it's very cool how it can be used so differently in those two very contrasting sections with a very similar bass part.
Yeah, I always thought the same thing, that it's kind of interesting how busy that bass part was. That, like, there was a conscious decision to bring in something like that.
And I mean, that person learned to play bass a month ago. I mean, come on.
And so there's also the famous guitar solo, which, you know, the urban legend, you can correct me if I get any of this wrong, but I think the legend was that Jimmy Page was in the studio watching Martin do this take.
Yeah.
And was it done in one take? Is that the story?
Yeah, it was done in one take, because the other part of the story is that if Martin didn't record it fast enough, it would be replaced with a flute solo.
Yeah.
And another thing that is kind of wild about this song is one of the most recognizable Jethro Tull songs doesn't have any flute in it.
Yeah, that's true.
I think not a lot of Tull songs without the flute are kind of among the most recognizable. I think the other one is Too Old to Rock and Roll. Yeah,
that's right. The more that I listen to this song, the more that I like that sort of bridge part where the solo is. And I think it works particularly well live. It works really well. Right after that bridge, when they come back in the acoustic and they have like the D verse, what do you think about that? Because to be honest, it kind of strikes me as a little pointless.
It doesn't really, because it's kind of gives it a cool down period.
Yeah.
And the song then returns to the intro, which has narrative sense, because it talks about a character whose day-to-day life is the same.
Yeah. I'm fine with the acoustic coming back, just like, I don't know, the D-ing is I'm not a big fan of.
Oh, you're talking specifically about the D.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Ian likes his sort of folk scat singing.
I actually, if I had one criticism of this song, it might be that it's maybe too long. Do you think?
Well, again, there is a repeating section at the end. But as I said, it does. I agree with people who think it makes narrative sense.
I'm also not super crazy about the trash can ending, like the big rock ending. I feel like that would work better live, but maybe in the studio a different ending would have worked better.
Yeah, maybe they thought about it with a live sort of perspective. Yeah, I do agree. Because as the first song on the album ending like that, it does feel a little bit odd, but it's got a nice contrast with the beginning of Cross-Eyed Mary.
Yeah, it does. I think we need to talk about the lyrics on this song, since the lyrics are like a big part of what made this song popular, I think. Where I think a lot of Tull fans know this, but some of the lyrics were actually written by, I think, Jenny Anderson, right? Who was
Jenny, I don't think some of the lyrics. I think she wrote the entire.
Oh, really?
Entire song. Yeah.
Who was Ian Anderson's wife
music
at the time?
Yeah, Ian wrote the music and Jenny wrote the lyrics, and it was also a well-known story in the Tull community, so we won't dwell on it too much, but it was inspired by a person that Jennifer met, and there was a story about a lost photograph, well, not a lost photograph, a photograph she promised, and then discovered that her camera had no film in it.
But I think it's interesting, kind of the electric parts of the song are sort of like the bombastic, like humorous parts of the character, and then the acoustic part is like the sympathetic part of it. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it does deliver that kind of dichotomy in the view of the author who observes the character.
Track 2, Cross-Eyed Mary.
Cross-eyed Mary, I goes jumping in again. She signs no contract, but she always plays the game.
I think there's a great contrast in the beginning of this song with the ending of Aqualung. It's almost theatrical. It kind of sets the scene. And that's, I don't know what is making that kind of cockerel noise at the start. Is it a sample? Is it an instrument that just sounds like a bird? I don't know, but this is one of the elements that will subsequently grow on the album. The kind of collage technique, random sounds, not actually musical sounds used in a musical context.
I'm pretty sure it's a voice calling Mary.
Mary?
Yeah, like Mary.
I never thought of it like that.
I've always heard it like
some
that.
Kind of like a bird call or something.
I'll listen to it again after, but that's what I've always heard it as.
Interesting. This is one of those songs that has a very heavy reliance on piano.
Yeah.
And in the intro, it's used very brilliantly, I think, to deliver tension and heaviness before the guitar comes in. So the intro feels very powerful without an electric guitar, which then, together with a very overdriven Hammond sound, then just brings the rest of the beefiness into the track.
Yeah, and the organ and fuzz guitar together is like, I mean, that's what makes the sound of this track. And I think it's a certain heaviness that hasn't really been heard yet in the discography, I think. And I think paired with Clive's drumming on this song, it's like straight like hip hop drums, which is pretty cool.
Oh yeah.
I don't think there's a section on this song where it's just drums, but if there was, I bet it would have been sampled at some point, because it would have made for a great hip hop beat, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I like the double tracking on the vocals in this track, and especially I like the place where it drops out and then returns. Like we have on the Steven Wilson remix, at least. I don't really remember how it's panned in the other versions. The double track vocals are panned opposite, in opposite channels, opposite ears if you're on headphones, and in a couple places one of the sides drops out and Ian's voice remains kind of alone, just one voice, and then the other voice comes back in, and has a great that moment has a great punch to it.
Yeah, I think the vocals are quite biting on this song, is how I would describe them. One of the things I like is I don't know what like the musical term would be for this, but in subsequent verses where they do sort of walking steps on the guitar and bass, and I think piano also, where in the middle of the verse they kind of have the da 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 da. I think that's kind of cool, how it changes every verse.
Also, lots of layers in this song, and in the drums as well. I think there's cowbell appearing on the verge of being heard, but it does also deliver tension. Yeah.
First cowbell, I think, used by Clive at this point. Could be wrong. Barry actually used cowbell a lot. I'm sure we'll sort of get to that more later. Yeah,
that's probably maybe one of the things why people subconsciously feel that the sound of this album is closer to the other ones, to the subsequent ones. Because drums aren't a thing that people readily notice most of the time, but they actually define the sound of the music so much.
I always thought the lyrical reference to Aqualung was really cool as a kid. I always thought that was really neat. I don't think there was a lot of thought put into it, but I just thought it was kind of cool to like see the tracks reference each other.
Yeah, that again, one of the things that makes people think it's a concept album.
Yeah.
Another picture, like the camera is moving down the street, and first we looked at one character and then we're following another.
Right.
But they're in the same universe, kind of.
I really like towards the end, in the outro, when the guitar does the kind of playback effect thing, like the da 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 da. I don't know if he actually played it that way or if that was actual, like, manipulation, but
I don't notice signs of manipulation. I think that's just been played that way, but I may be mistaken.
The first time I saw Ian/Tull/whatever was the 40th anniversary Aqualung tour in 2011, which was the last one with Martin. And I don't know if they played every single song from Aqualung, but they got close at least. And I remember being impressed with this song live. And I know that, everybody has their own opinion on what, Ian is like live now, most of which is overwhelmingly negative. But I remember being kind of surprised, like, wow, this really like rocks, like even today. So that's kind of like the main memory I have with this song, I think.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't heard this song live. I don't think Ian played it either of the times I saw him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say it doesn't rely on voice. It relies on voice very much, but maybe this is the kind of thing that he's still capable of delivering.
Yeah.
Maybe it does have parts of upper register that he's not really comfortable with these days.
And maybe just like the hardness of the rest of the instruments kind of carried it along or something. Track 3, Cheap Day Return.
On present platform, do your soft shoe shuffle dance. Brush away the cigarette ash that's falling down your back.
So this is a great little song, I think, and I really wish I had more to say about it, but it's kind of hard for me to think of stuff considering the length of it and kind of the simplicity. But I think, most Tull fans know kind of the story behind this song it was apparently written while waiting for a train as Ian was coming back from seeing his father in the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so that's why the lyrics are about what they're about. And I think the story goes that like it ends where it does because the train showed up, and so he stopped writing, and that's kind of where it ended.
I haven't heard that part of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, one of the actually autobiographical songs by Ian, which is a rare thing. Mm-hmm. In the big picture of the album, this is the first sort of acoustic interlude on it, which provides contrast, and it provides a semblance of narrative. Mm-hmm. Even though we are very much away from the characters in the previous two songs. This is this kind of a slice of life thing, but it still lends like Rorschach images, or suggestive lyrics. If you show a row of different images, people will kind of will make up their own story about them. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about the album is that without being a concept album, without being an album that has a story that the musicians wanted to tell, it lends itself very well to making up of a story as you listen to it. And not every album is like that. Mm-hmm. Musically, I think it is kind of difficult to discuss. I really like the mellotron part.
I was going to ask what that was, because
that's a mellotron. I'm sure of it.
Yeah,
John is credited with playing a mellotron.
Okay,
on this album.
The only thing I could think of was like an accordion, but it didn't really.
It's not. It may be an accordion patch on a mellotron, or as you can combine patches on a mellotron. For those who don't know, which I'm sure everyone who listens to us knows what a mellotron is. The mellotron is an early example of a sampler. It's an instrument with pieces of tape with sounds pre-recorded on them, and when you press a key, that tape is played back, so you can have flutes or violins or accordions recorded on that tape and play a keyboard as if you were playing one of those instruments.
Strawberry Fields Forever, if you can think of.
Yeah, Strawberry Fields Forever, the flutes, yes, and Nights in White Satin by the Moody Blues, and lots of other examples. And this, the mellotron part on this could have been accordion combined with something else for a different sort of timbre. And I like how the melodies of the acoustic guitar in one channel complement the mellotron parts in the other. There's clearly musical dialogue happening, which I like very much.
Yeah, I like in particular the whole lyrics about on Preston platform do your soft shoe shuffle dance with cigarette ash falling down your pants or whatever. I always thought that was kind of cute.
Yeah, well, Ian's a great lyricist.
Yeah.
What's not to like?
But I remember as a kid sort of spending an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out what the meaning of the title was. And the closest I got was that it's a place where you can go to return your cheap days or days that you didn't like. And I have no idea if that's on target, but maybe it is.
So you mean you still don't know what the meaning of the title is?
Oh, no. I like to think that's what it means, though.
I may keep it secret from you if you don't.
Oh, you know what it means?
Yes, of course.
Go ahead, let's hear it.
It's a cheap, i.e. inexpensive return ticket on a train, a day return ticket where you go to one place and return on the same day. Oh,
is that like a Europe thing?
I think it's like a Britain thing.
Oh, okay. I never knew that. Well, that's interesting. We're learning new stuff here.
It's quite natural that you didn't get that, because I don't think anything like that exists in the United States.
Or in Japan, that I've heard of. That's cool. Track 4, Mother Goose.
Walk down by the bathing pond to try and catch some sun. Saw at least 100 schoolgirls sobbing into handkerchiefs as one.
The first song, I think, that utilizes collage in such a great amount. They start utilizing lots of weird sounds. It's kind of a musical piece composed of haphazard, improbable sounds, and I really like that about it. The percussion on it doesn't really sound like... It's clearly, they're clearly using some drums and, I don't know, sleigh bells on a hi-hat probably, but overall the feeling of percussion on this track is like they found something in a barn, boxes and pieces of wood, pieces of junk, and just turned them into musical instruments. It's lovely.
Yeah, it was always comparable to me kind of with Fat Man, even though I know it's not the same, because I mean Fat Man is just bongos, but the kind of feeling was always kind of similar to a song like that for me.
Yeah, it is a folky Jethro Tull song, and they tend to have a similar feeling. But I think this in particular is kind of more than just a folk song, because it dwells a lot of the time on that acoustic random junk sound.
Yeah.
And then the electric guitar and bass come in quite unexpectedly when you've kind of gotten used to the overall sound of the song. And I think it's a brilliant stroke as well.
So I'll say first, this is one of my all-time favorite Tull songs. Like, this is like the absolute top tier for me. I love the heck out of the song. And I actually kind of disagree with the idea that it's a collage song, and I see where you're coming from with that, but...
I'm not saying it's a collage song, I'm just saying I feel there's kind of a collage technique employed.
Yeah.
With the choice of the instruments. I love this song. I'm not using any of the words. The words junk or barn are not used in a derogatory kind of way.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it a lot.
I guess what I mean is I feel like there was a very conscious attempt to go for like a Renaissance fair, like sort of medieval, like folky sound, like almost in a way like a precursor to Songs from the Wood. I feel like. Yeah,
probably.
And that's kind of what it's always struck me as. It strikes me as like a medieval, like Renaissance fair type song, but it's so beautiful. And I think the chorus in particular, just the way that it's sung, is just fantastic. I think it's one of the best moments in the entire discography, in my opinion.
You're calling what are you calling the chorus? "Walk Down by the Bathing Pond"?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think of it as a bridge, but it doesn't really matter. I love that section because there's some time signature stuff happening there, which is one of the trademark Jethro Tull things in my opinion. It's got bars of different lengths, but the whole section sums up to 4/4. So you can, in your head, you can keep counting 4/4 and it will resolve. The verse will then come in on 1. But the bar length in this section go 4/2/3/4, 4/2/3/4, 4/2. So in this situation, I'm quite sure it is something that some of the things that Ian comes up with naturally. It follows the lyrics. This kind of rhythm, and the fact that it's weird combination of time signatures is just because the lyrics work like that.
Yeah, I had never even
in this
thought
particular place
of the time signature before.
It does have these accents. If you count a steady 4/4 beat throughout, it doesn't make sense. It will resolve, but in the course of this part, it doesn't make sense. You don't have the one in a 4/4 beat doesn't feel like a 1 there.
Which it's much in keeping in tune with the lyrics themselves, which I know, a direct quote from Ian I know is he's called them a wee bit of nonsense. So it's just a completely absurd track. But I think there's some great lyrics in there. I mean, whether they're nonsense or not.
Yeah.
I love the whole thing about seeing 100 schoolgirls crying and, you know, they didn't know I was a schoolboy or they didn't know I was Long John Silver or whatever.
How do you interpret these lines? They didn't know I was a schoolboy.
I don't know if stuff like that has any meaning to me. It's just, I don't know, it's kind of a youth song to me. Like, you know, it's walking around in the woods, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is probably just because I grew up listening to it, like around that age, like schoolboy, middle school age. I mean, we don't really say schoolboy in America. No one really says that. But I don't know. I mean, that to me, it just has that kind of feel, that like middle school dynamic when you're sort of just becoming cognizant of, I guess, like social structure in the school. I don't know if that makes any sense. I might just be rambling, but that's kind of what that's the kind of feeling it's always had to me.
Yeah, that is cool, I think.
I think the flutes are amazing. in the song. I don't remember if Martin plays the other flutes, but
I'm not sure.
I think that they contribute a lot to the song.
I think in the notes for one of the previous albums, Martin mentioned at some point that some song or other was the last time that he had played the flute on a record. So
that
these are
sounds familiar.
probably all in.
I don't know why I know this, but I remember reading somewhere a long time ago that the backing vocals on the 4 and 20 Laborers part, the backing vocal is actually Jeffrey Hammond.
Oh, that's cool.
I don't know why I know that, but I remember hearing that somewhere.
Overall, you mentioned this having a Renaissance fair type feel. This is another one of these different settings in there that the album takes us throughout. Like, this song feels like you are listening to it on a Renaissance fair.
Yeah.
And that is what I'm talking about when I'm saying that kind of the album takes us from place to place. It doesn't feel like it's all played in one place.
Yeah. The only thing I think for me is that none of those places feel connected to each other, I guess is what I'd say.
Well, this is the part where we make up our own story.
Yeah. I guess like Aqualung and Cross-Eyed Mary is like inside the city and Mother Goose is like outside. I don't know.
Well, I beg your pardon. Mother Goose is inside the city because there's Piccadilly Circus and there's foreign tourists.
Oh, right. Yeah. So I guess I don't know enough about London to know what Piccadilly Circus is exactly. I guess it's just a circus.
Well, you can trust Ian to know that there are definitely no elephants and no lions.
Okay. Okay. The one part of this track that I'm a little uneasy about is I have kind of mixed feelings about the electric guitar coming in. Which it's not that I mean, something probably needed to happen at that point in the track just to push it along, but kind of just throwing electric guitar in, I don't really know if that settles with me.
I don't know. I like that place because it does. If it didn't happen, the track would have felt samey.
Yeah, I agree. So maybe something else, but I don't know. Something about just throwing an electric instrument where there wasn't one before doesn't sit well with me.
I see. I think when I talk about collage, there's another thing in this song, the very ending.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that.
With the flute playing in the background, the flutes or the mellotron or both. I interpret this as more collage, as a kind of a non sequitur thing, and this is one of the first sort of non sequitur musical moments on the album.
Yeah, I kind of agree. To me, it's a really great example of like scene building, if that makes sense. Where, I mean, to me, when I hear that ending, which I love that ending, it's quite quiet. It feels sort of far off. So to me, it's kind of like, you're in the hills in the countryside, English countryside, and you can sort of see or hear, whether it's the Renaissance fair, maybe, it's like you see or you hear something going on kind of just out of your sight over on the hill or something.
Yeah.
But beautiful track, 10/10 for me. I can't say enough positive things about this one.
Well, you didn't like the electric guitar.
Yeah, that's true. Track 5, Wond'ring Aloud.
Wond'ring aloud, will the years treat us well?
So I think it's hard to talk about this one without also talking about Wond'ring Again or Wond'ring Aloud again or whatever. But at the same time, I feel like it's not really fair to sort of compare this track to that one, in the sense that, this is what they chose to be on the album, Wond'ring Aloud. And I feel like, we kind of have to work with what was presented in that sense. But for me, at least, it's kind of hard because I think Wond'ring Again is so much better than this song. I don't know what you think, but
I absolutely love Wond'ring Again / Wond'ring Aloud Again. It's one of my favorite Tull tracks ever.
Yeah.
I do think it's cooler, but I also think that it wouldn't have fit here.
You think so?
Yeah, I think Wond'ring Aloud as an interlude works better in the context of Aqualung than the entire multi-part structure of Wond'ring Aloud Again would have.
For anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, Wond'ring Aloud Again it's basically a longer, extended version of this song with different lyrics, which was on, I think, the Living in the Past compilation album. Was that right?
Yeah.
Wond'ring Aloud is basically a shorter version of that song with different lyrics.
Wond'ring Aloud is like the first part of Wond'ring Aloud Again, because then the other track goes further and explores a different musical territory altogether. Yeah, one of the things I think Ian talks about when describing this song, he says it is a making a cup of tea kind of song, which is funny to me because he has definitely one other making a cup of tea song, which is Grace.
Yeah.
On Minstrel in the Gallery.
Which I think is a way better song than this one.
Oh, come on. Still, Wond'ring Aloud is a contrast on the album. It is the acoustic interlude number 2. There's the lush strings after the sort of Ren Fair / junk closet sounds of Mother Goose. And the progressive layering that's happening with the bass and the piano coming in, the sound opens up and then strings just pour in. And it gives you the feeling of a camera just panning wider and the space getting bigger. It's a moment. It's not a story in this song. It's just a moment, and it's short enough to deliver that moment and to let us dwell in it as long as we need to.
Yeah, you brought up the strings, which is important because that's kind of like the one major difference on this song compared to the other version of it. The other version didn't have strings, and the strings are nice. I like them. I think the thing that kind of kills this song for me, to be honest, is I think the lyrics are really cheesy, and maybe that's just me, but it's just like a really bad, cheesy love story, which doesn't particularly thrill me. But
well, Ian has confessed that he isn't really comfortable writing love songs, and this is one of the times he came closest to writing one. And I don't know, I don't mind it. He's still good with words. Good enough with words to make it not entirely love me tender levels of,
of cheese,
of corn, of whatever.
Yeah, I'm probably
whatever are other food items.
I'm probably savaging the song too hard, but I mean, I think it's nice, it's fine, but it's always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I'm not a huge fan of it. I guess I kind of see your point about Wond'ring Again not fitting, but honestly, like I would take Wond'ring Again any day over this song. I think it would have improved this album a lot, I think, if that song was on here, but I guess I see your point.
Could be. For me, sort of listening to Wond'ring Aloud, it doesn't make me wish I was listening to Wond'ring Again, because I just remember Wond'ring Again and it gives me enough memory of it that I can, I don't know if I'm making sense, that I am enjoying Wond'ring Aloud on its own terms, as well as part of a bigger song that I can listen to later.
Yeah, I think part of the reason I'm bringing up Wond'ring Again so much is because I really love the lyrics on that version of the song for the most part. There's some weird ones on that version too, like the whole thing about the brainwashing government lackeys or whatever. But I think particularly the part of Wond'ring Again, which is Wond'ring Aloud on this part, if you know what I mean, like the outro part of Wond'ring Again. The lyrics are fantastic on that song, and I think they're some of Ian's best ever, actually, about someday will a son be born, will open his eyes, and all that kind of thing. So to see that be reduced on the album to like what I consider like a cheesy love story is kind of sad for me.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but again, the lyrical theme is completely different from the rest of the album. It would have stood out much more, the whole Wond'ring Aloud Again. It's a thing of its own. The lyrics, I think, don't really sit well with the rest of the themes on the album. Yeah. You gotta consider that.
Track 6, Up to Me.
Take it to the cinema and leave you in a wimpy bar. You tell me that we've gone too far. Come running up to me.
Again, I think there's quite a lot of collage in this track. It begins with a random kind of laughter, which I connected kind of subconsciously, connect this laughter to. There's on Mother Goose, after the words drives a lorry, there's a kind of a
Yeah.
And it kind of feels to me like one of the characters that we heard in that song. It came back here and is one of the people laughing. There's again some kind of junk barn sounding stuff happening. And unlike Mother Goose, which I do agree that there's a kind of Ren Fair, probably to me feeling more like in the middle of a city, but doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
This song is like Ian is singing in the middle of a rehearsal room. With a bunch of random stuff happening around. It's kind of cinematic. We focus on the person singing with a guitar, and then there's all sorts of different characters around him playing or doing their own thing, and the electric guitar is utilized also in a very interesting way, because the first times it comes in is just kind of a squeak burst. It's not really a musical sound.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I would also describe that as a squeak.
wouldn't go as far as to call this whole musique concrète, but it kind of does feel like, again, using a lot of improbable sounds, not really musical ones, to make music.
I think the percussion, again, is kind of like you were saying, like sort of the trash sound, where there's lots of different sounds going on. I think when we talk about like placemaking and, you know, scenery and images that we've been talking about a lot on this episode, there's a lot in this song, I think, particularly, like you mentioned. So, you know, they talk about the wimpy bar in the cinema, and, you know, I think the opening laughter to me kind of, it signifies like sort of a pub feel, or like a tavern or something like that. That's kind of what it makes me think of.
Yeah, that could interpret it like that as well.
This song has grown on me a lot over the years. I didn't really care for it at first, but I like it quite a lot now. I think the lyrics are great on this song. There's some really good ones on there.
Even though these lyrics, I feel like are kind of simpler.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of
than the other ones on the album.
There's a lot of lyrics that Ian has that I think are just sort of like random vignettes strung together. But I don't have any problem with lyrics like that. I think they're quite entertaining, to be honest. So I think this song is one of those, and I think there's a lot of kind of interesting things to latch onto in it. There's a just one thing. There's a Tull cover band called the Dayglow Pirates. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. So shout out to them if they're listening. But I always thought that was a really clever name to like take a really obscure lyric like that and turn it into something like that.
Yeah, I like that line. I'm not criticizing the lyrics up to me, but I'm not sure they're a huge way away from the lyrics to Wond'ring Aloud. They have a different theme, but they're not as inventive as other Ian's lyrics on this album.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I just would say that Up to Me isn't a love song, which I think is big in terms of framing it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, again, like I said, it's very random, like the lyrics of this song, but I think stuff like that really works just because I think that the scenes he's painting are interesting, and there's a lot of things that you can kind of latch onto individually in them.
Yeah, I do agree. I don't have a lot to talk about with this song, but I'm not far away from criticizing it.
Yeah, I'd just say, like, musically, it's kind of bluesy, I think, but it's sort of like, again, it's like medieval bluesy, sort of, or it's like tavern bluesy, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And I don't want to go, like, too far down the rabbit hole of talking about B-sides and bonus tracks and stuff, but the track Lick Your Fingers Clean was, I think, an early version of this song. I think it was on a couple compilations, like the 20th anniversary and maybe some others.
Yeah.
There's a couple comparisons between them. I don't know if there's any, like, you know, direct things that were carried over, but I think kind of the laughter is the same between the two of them, and I think they have kind of like a general similar structure.
I agree, I know what you're talking about. And with this album in particular has a lot of outtakes that are very similar to the tracks that made onto the album. Well, not a lot, but we can name Lick Your Fingers Clean. We can also talk about Nursey, which is basically Cheap Day Return Part 2,
right?
Because it has the same theme.
Yeah, that's a great song.
Yeah,
but we'll save those for the B-sides episode, whenever that is.
Sure.
Track 7, My God.
Call on him to save me.
This is probably one of my top songs on the album, and I'm sure a lot of people like it as well. I was quite surprised when I heard Ian talking about this song, and he said that thematically the kind of emotion that this song is based about is it being a song of a 14-year-old boy rather than a 20-something like Ian was when he wrote this song. So he was talking about his experience as a much younger person. But I disagree with that, because I don't hear the way that the song is presented. I don't hear the voice of a 14-year-old boy in it. I hear a performer. It is very much, when again with the different scenes, different scenery in the album, this is a song that feels like we're listening to a person on a stage.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in it. It is a song as presented by a performer. Maybe the ideas and emotions are those of a 14-year-old boy, but there's no 14-year-old boy on stage at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's funny he would mention that this comes from a 14-year-old, just because I think this isn't really the thing that a lot of 14-year-olds think about. You know, I mean, I certainly wasn't when I was 14 in church, even though I would later come to, I think, identify with a lot of kind of the criticism that's put forth in this song, but I think certainly not when I was 14. But that's kind of funny. I took sort of a sharp breath when you said this is one of your top favorite songs, because believe it or not, it's actually my bottom on this album.
Really? Wow.
I'm not a fan of this song. I mean, we can talk about it more in depth, I guess, but just generally speaking, kind of my two problems with this song is I think the lyrics are overbearing, where, you know, there's certainly a theme of religious criticism on the album, and, you know, I'm not faulting Ian for that. I mean, he can write about whatever he wants, but, you know, this is kind of the one song, I think, where, like, he's really, like, nailing you over the head with it, to the point where, you know, it's not subtle or clever at all, I think. And then secondly, I think the music just gets very plotting for me. Like, particularly kind of like the noodling on the guitar at the beginning and then sort of throughout. And when we get to like the monk chanting and stuff, it's just kind of, it's too much for me. It's not really one that sticks out.
That is fascinating, because I know a lot of people who like this song. And
yeah, I do too.
I will disagree that it has a noodling kind of feel, because to me, the guitar in the intro, that kind of the repeating acoustic guitar line, it has a kind of a transfixing quality. It has an ebb and flow that grabs your attention, as Ian makes his point. It is basically kind of mass hypnotism. The song is actually a sermon, but it is an anti-clerical sermon.
Yeah.
And with this acoustic guitar keeping you focused, the piano closes up behind you, and you feel like you're sort of being hypnotized by this person, and then the full band hits you in the face with the riff, and it is an experience.
Yeah, I think
I do agree that the lyrics in the song are kind of direct and not subtle at all, but it doesn't make me dislike the song. It's one of the things that I associate with Aqualung as a whole, as an album that when I say it doesn't have a mood that I resonate with a lot. But this song on its own, I find it brilliant, and I have more things to say about it.
This is the one song I mentioned earlier that I kind of agree with the progressive label for this song. That's kind of the one song that I think kind of fits that style, because it gets quite, you know, abstract and unexpected, particularly when it gets to the whole chanting thing.
I wonder how they came up with that chanting the choir part. If you focus on it instead of the flute, it sounds really strange, but to me it works so well together. This is clearly writing in counterpoint in that. The flute solo, I think I maybe prefer the live versions of the solo where Ian grunts and snorts a lot. It kind of does these typical Ian Anderson comical things. But you can note how the flute solo on the record is overdubbed to make up for this kind of lack of visual element and keep you engulfed. And the guitar solos are overdubbed as well. I think I tried listening very closely, and I don't think it's a delay or delay pedal or double tracking manipulation. I think it is the guitar solo played twice, slightly differently, and then put in slightly different channels. And again, this shows that we are dealing here with an orchestral approach. It's not, no one's jamming or improvising.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of the guitar that way.
I think it's shifted to give the impression of delay again, to make it sound larger. But I listened closely to the endings of the notes, and I think they are different. So it's not the same part repeated. Different performances of this part. The
heavy part of this song, kind of that main like heavy riff, it's almost kind of like proto-metal to me in a way. Like the way that it hits, it almost kind of has like a resemblance to Black Sabbath or something for me.
Yeah. Well, a lot of bands were experimenting with that without being metal.
Sure.
There's an argument that 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson is the first quote-unquote metal song, which came out a few years before that. And again, another sort of collage or non sequitur of whatever you may call it element, the background choir at the end of the song. To me, to continue the metaphor of a sermon, that choir feels like you've been jerked bodily out of a mass hypnosis session or kind of a cult orgy, and you're trying to get your bearings as you come to your senses after it. And it sort of makes the point of the song. I think I came up with that metaphor as I was listening to it over these past few days, that this song is anti-clerical, but the form of this song is a sermon. And I think it kind of makes the point.
Yeah, I think Ian would agree with that. I think that's kind of exactly what he was going for.
So yeah, this will be one of the tracks we disagree upon,
Yep.
but that's what makes it interesting.
I mean, one thing I'll say about it is I think it works better live, probably. I actually don't remember if I've heard this song live. I think I probably have, but it just strikes me, being such like a heavy song, I think it probably works better in a live setting.
Well, it works well in a live setting. I haven't heard it live, but I have properly live, but it appears on a lot of live albums. But I like the studio elements as well, like the choirs and the overdubs.
Track 8, Hymn 43.
Hymn 43 to me feels like a postscript to My God.
Yep, I totally agree.
It's sort of the same idea restated in plainer terms.
Yeah, I think the lyrics are more clever. I think he's sort of saying the same thing as My God, but I think the lyrics are better this time, in my opinion.
Well, could be. There's in My God, there's of course there's a lot of chastising of organized religion that Ian wanted to do, and I think it's done. There are lyrics similar to that, to those of My God in other Ian songs, or where he's being very direct and critical of a specific subset of people, or a specific idea or event. And while in Hymn 43 it's done with the perspective of talking about Jesus and talking about the responsibility that historical person could feel if they knew what came about of Christianity.
And I think it's worth mentioning that My God opened the second side of the album, which I think was actually titled, like the second side was titled My God.
Yes, and the first side was titled Aqualung.
Right. And every song on this side of the album mentions God, so there is kind of a loose concept running through those.
Yeah, you could say that. Does Slipstream mention God?
Yeah, when you press on God's
I'm
last...
pressing God's waiter. Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. Musically, I think Hymn 43 is an excellent example of using piano to drive a rock song. And if it weren't so solidly made, I would have called it plain. But the slight contrast between the forward-moving parts and the riff that sort of stops and stays in the same place, it all feels together like an absolute banger.
Yeah, I think the thing that really elevates it is the guitar muting. I think that's really cool. Like that's the coolest part of the song to me.
I probably think that the piano is the coolest part of the song, but yeah, I know what you mean.
I mean particularly with the muting and the way that the drums are hitting it on the downbeat, I think it really drives it along in the banger way you're talking about.
I feel of these parts with the muted guitar as the places where it stops, and the verses as where it moves forward, because I don't know, kind of the harmony feels to me that way.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think it's kind of, again, similar to other songs on this album, like Up to Me and stuff. I think there's still some leftovers of blues Tull on a song like this, and I think they would soon be completely destroyed on the next album. But so this is kind of like their last hurrah, I guess.
Yeah, probably. Not a lot to say about this song other than that.
One thing I like lyrically is I like the little reference to the Saints of God hymn, if you know what I mean, where he has that thing about, and I saw him in the city and on the mountains of the moon. Just for me, I went to a K through 12 private Christian school where we had chapel every day, and so we sang a lot of hymns like that every day about, I sing a song of the Saints of God. So I think it's kind of clever how he makes a reference to that hymn. Yeah,
it shows that he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I only learned about it from annotations to the song, because obviously I wasn't brought up in an American Christian family. But yeah, it's quite cool. Well, it shows the layers and shows reference to other parts of culture, which Ian is so good at.
Yeah, and he also, he's not just criticizing, like the previous song, he specifically, he mentioned the Church of England by name in the last one. And on this one, he also kind of goes after America a little too, where he has that whole line about...
unsung Western hero.
Yeah, like the cowboy killing the Indians or something. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, finds a lot of things to criticize.
Yeah, there's a lot of lyrical stuff to talk about on this album, I'm kind of just realizing.
Yeah, well, we tried to talk about them in the first ones, in the first songs with all those characters, but it merits its own discussion and probably some more analysis, because the lyrics are really dense. This is what I can say.
Yeah, but if you think these are dense, just get ready for the next episode.
Oh yes.
Track 9, Slipstream.
And you're spinning the slipstream, tideless unreasoning, paddle right out of the main.
So this is another song kind of similar to Cheap Day Return in that I think it's a really nice, sweet, short song, and I wish I had more to say about it than I do. But the thing that I think sticks out is just kind of the tenderness of it. You know, it sounds very like lovingly sung, I guess.
Interesting, yeah.
And then at the very end, you have kind of like I don't know what better way I could describe it, but like the seasick string sound, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, the glissandi.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, when Ian talks about this song, he says it is enigmatic, and he doesn't really want to get deep into explaining what this song is about, but one of the interpretations I can come up with that this song is a metaphor for death, and it kind of further reinforces the conceptual part of the album for me, the imaginary conceptual part, and the string glissandi at the end are kind of a similar non sequitur to the other codas on the album, and also it feels like, you know, a physical metaphor for a spirit leaving the body. So paddle right out of the mess in the lyrics of this song is, to me, stands for dying.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but it very well could be.
You press on God's waiter your last dime and he hands you the bill, so you're let go. You're let go from life into the slipstream, and you paddle right out of the mess. And the mess is the entire earthly existence that we've been discussing at length since the beginning of that Ian has been discussing at length since the beginning of the album, with the tramps and the prostitutes and religion and all of that stuff. Also, the lyrics, the first lines, maybe there's not much of this song lyrically, just the way the lyrics are written, not thematically, but the way Ian put words together in this song. They oddly remind me of the poem Invitation to Voyage by Charles Baudelaire, specifically as translated by Roy Campbell in 1952, so Ian could have been familiar with it. I found it hard to find a specific place in that poem to quote to illustrate what I'm talking about, but here's some lines from Invitation to Voyage by Charles Baudelaire. Each sumptuous ceiling, each mirror revealing the wealth of the East will be hung, so the part and the whole may speak to the soul in its native indigenous tongue. And these the parts of the lyrics in Slipstream, the spiritless undying selves and the products of wealth, they kind of put me in mind of that poem. I'm not sure I'm making sense. I just may be associating a poem I know with this song, but
yeah, it could be. I mean, lyrically, I have no idea what the song is about. I assume it's some kind of criticism of the finances of organized religion, but that's just like my surface level reading of it. But to me, I mean, it's just a nice song, I think, and I wish I had more to add than I do, because I quite like the song, but there's not a lot to it for me.
Right. I like the song as well, if that wasn't clear.
Track 10, Locomotive Breath.
The shuffling madness of the locomotive breath runs the all-time loser headlong to his death.
I'd actually like to ask you first about this song, or what you think about it, because I have a lot to say about it and will do so at length. But it kind of sums things up for me on the album.
Well, this is another one. I don't mean for this to sound like a cop-out or anything, but this is another one with Aqualung where it's such a ubiquitous song, and I've heard it so many times that I don't really know how I feel about it anymore. Just some quick points that I would mention on this one. I think the song is a lot better live. I don't know if that's a controversial opinion, but the studio version is quite different. I think it has kind of a different feeling to it, and part of that is because the acoustic guitar is much more prominent on the studio version, whereas it's non-existent in the live version. And I think that kind of changes the song quite a bit. I love the muting on the guitar. I think that's like my favorite part of the song, I think, is just that. I think that, the song itself musically is kind of basic. I don't necessarily think it's bad, but there's not a ton of stuff going on, like except for the intro, of course, which the intro is a whole thing in and of itself. But the actual meat of it is fairly basic.
Well, just you wait. I will tell you all about it.
But one last point I'll just mention is I didn't really realize before yet I listened to it today how the whatever Charlie stole the handle part, the guitar on that is crazy, which I never really noticed that until just like when I listened just now. It sounds like there's like 5 or 6 guitars just like double tracked wailing in that part. Maybe it's something less than that, but
which they could have done.
Yeah, but that kind of struck me just because I had never really noticed it before. My general feeling on the song is it's fine. I'm not like raving about it like I know a lot of people are. But again, it's just one that I've heard so many times that I've been kind of done with it for many years. It's not really anything new to me anymore. But I think it's fine. I don't really particularly dislike it or anything.
I do agree with you about having heard it so many times.
Yeah.
But I have thoughts about it.
Go ahead.
And I'd like to talk about them. This part is going to take us slightly deeper into analysis than we normally go. And those of our listeners, if anyone is familiar with the sort of music theory area of YouTube, they will recognize what shall now follow as my attempt at a love letter to the YouTube channel 12 Tone, but in my case, sadly, with 0 doodles of elephants. You should know I have a script prepared for this part, and I will be following it. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. So buckle up. I don't assume that our listeners are all music theorists. I know I'm not one. So before I talk about how I think Locomotive Breath works, I want to briefly explain the concept of musical resolution. A lot of Western music consists of melodies supported by chords. The way these chords feel to us in relation to the melody will contextualize the melody for us. When talking about a melody, we often talk about the key the melody is in. A key is a set of notes defined by their relationship to the main note of the key called the root. When a melody arrives onto the root, it gives us the feeling of coming home, and as we get close enough to the root, we begin to feel how the melody wants to go there. Listen to this. If I don't finish the melody, you're going to be mad, right? What I did there was let the melody resolve. Chords work in much the same way. In the context of a musical piece, the root chord has a pull to it, and arriving at it is called resolution. Now, it does make a difference where we arrive from. Consider these chords. The third chord in this sequence points us very strongly back towards the root. If we were to linger on this chord, we would feel how it doesn't want to stay there, and we won't be at ease until we resolve back home. That was something called a dominant 7th chord, and the tension that it created gave us a strong, satisfying release. Now listen to this. The third chord in this sequence still points us back to the root, but it doesn't feel like it insists. We could dwell on it with a much lesser sense of urgency, as if we were allowed to return home anytime we please. That was something that doesn't really have a name, even though it is very commonly employed as a resolution in traditional and early European music. This movement doesn't announce our return nearly as emphatically as coming in from a dominant, which feels much stronger and has more direction than this. Less tension equals weaker release, and this kind of weak resolution is a very important musical device in Locomotive Breath. Now, Ian himself has explained a lot how Locomotive Breath is about the global population growth, but being a good piece of art, it is more than that, and on a general poetic level, it is very much a song about being unable to catch a break. The lyrics and the relentless rhythm convey it very strongly, but if that weren't enough, Locomotive Breath plays with our expectations by setting up tensions and never resolving them in a way that feels good. In other words, the song never gives us a break, treating us just like its main character. I shall now demonstrate how it works on multiple levels. Let's zoom in on the smallest building block of the song, the main riff. The riff has that weak resolution built directly into it. First, it firmly establishes the root, then leaves it as if we were about to go somewhere, but instead of that, immediately circles back home. Exposition, anticipation, subversion. There's a formula. Now let's zoom out and look at a longer stretch, the verse and chorus. During its first half, the verse simply sits on the root chord, punctuated by the riff. Then in the second half, we are taken rather excitingly to the dominant chord, which I mentioned before, as it goes, runs the all-time loser, headlong to his death. The appearance of the dominant chord is very important here because it promises us a strong resolution of dominant to root, but instead we get that extra step of weak resolution all over again, which dissipates all the tension that was just built up. Headlong to his death, he feels. That extra step denies us an immediate, strong and satisfying release, and when the chorus arrives, we get the same kind of blue bold with an even bigger build-up, an even bigger promise that is never fulfilled. Old Charlie stole the handle and the train, it won't stop going, no way to slow down. Same formula: exposition, anticipation, subversion. Now let's zoom out once again and look at how the entire song is built. At first we get two verses and choruses that establish what the song feels like, and then Ian's flute solo arrives and we get an intense dynamic build-up of tension, the strongest one in the song. There it is, the flute becomes more frantic and climbs higher and higher. We are bound to receive an orgasmic, cathartic, explosive release. It's right there on the tips of Ian's fingers, but instead the built-up tension just winds down and gets left behind while the song plows onward past it. And after the third and last verse, in a masterstroke that extinguishes all hope, the song fades out. Exposition, anticipation, subversion on every scale. Locomotive Breath is a musical fractal. That's sort of my point here. There's lots more that could be talked about. I completely ignored the piano intro, for instance, but what do you think?
It's like it's the beginning of like a spin-off podcast we got going on here. Yeah, I think your general point is that it's a song that's based on tension, and I
Yes.
totally agree in the sense, not even just musically but lyrically as well, where you have the whole thing going on about the guy trapped in the train that's, you know, barreling towards nowhere or whatever.
And in the live version that you mentioned, of course, there is no way to keep that tension without just cutting out the song,
Yeah.
or fading out. So in the live version is actually the only version where the tension resolves, where they go no way to slow down.
Yeah.
And that is what makes the live version so powerful. And I think all this harmonic stuff I talked about, of course, it's not something that Ian came up with intentionally. It's not like he came up with a song that had lots of dominant chord resolution and then thought, no, I will insert this D chord everywhere, so it never gives that resolution. I think it's the other way around. He came up with that chord loop and felt that it was the kind of thing that keeps things tense, and then they recorded the song to make it fit. And in the recording notes, I think it was one of the songs that was difficult to record, and they did it subsequently track by track. And one of the things Ian wanted about it, specifically what he talked about, he didn't want the song to explode. He wanted things to be kept as if boiling under a lid, which is very much what I just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So it is all very specifically intentional. The tension is intentional.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning how this was like a legendary live song for them, where, you know, this was, I think, you know, their closer for basically forever.
Because it works so well, because with all that tension built up, when they actually resolve it at the end of a live performance, it feels cathartic.
Yeah. And I like the live version on Bursting Out and stuff, where they go into the Dam Busters March. I always thought that was pretty cool. One thing, before we move on from this, I just want to mention a little bit about the piano intro. But have you seen the documentary, the Classic Artists documentary?
No, I don't think so.
I highly recommend everybody watch that. It's difficult to get a hold of now because it's out of print. It's expensive, I think, but it's a great documentary where they interview a lot of old faces like Barry Barlow and John Evan and stuff like that. It's really kind of a rare piece of material, I think, for Tull. But John Evan talks about the piano intro for the song in the documentary, and he basically just said that It was just a long roundabout way of avoiding having to slam right into the opening riff from the beginning. And he kind of tells like an entertaining story about how they just entrusted that entire intro to him. And they just kind of told him like, we're going to go out and eat. You stay here and make the piano intro. And so he started with just the most simple, classical beginning he could think of, which is the bum bum. And then he just kind of took it from there and did it in a few takes, he said. So that was written entirely by him with nobody else involved. Just he came up with it. And it was just a way to start it on a slower note so it didn't just, slam right into the beginning riff.
And the piano intro is brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Track 11, Wind Up. So this is an interesting song. It's one that I never really paid much attention to when I was sort of growing up listening to this album. It was always kind of an afterthought for me, and I think, to be honest, it's a little bit of an afterthought on the album too, just kind of the way it's positioned. I like the beginning. I think that the opening piano chords and stuff is kind of cool. I'm not crazy about the rest of it though. It gets a little plodding for me.
I don't know. This song feels like a classic postscript sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree.
And the whole song is it is a one more thing.
Right, yeah. In
the course of the album. But what I feel about it, this song, the lyrical theme of this song feels to me much more a young person's song than My God. Yeah. Because, well, it's right there in the lyrics, when I was young.
Right.
And they packed me off to school. And there's collage in this song. The part before the guitar solo, it feels to me like a boy going down the street, hearing dogs and whistles, things like that. But the scene that the song paints kind of, to me, feels, again, very cinematic. We have the panned closed mic guitars at the beginning in two channels, and the vocals in the middle. It feels kind of intimate.
Yeah.
And then it starts opening up, getting to the rock part. And when the first verse repeats at the end, but to a piano, it feels like instead of that guitar player we've been listening to at the beginning of the song, like one-on-one, now we're looking at the same person, but they're on a stage in the spotlight, and it feels bigger. And after that, the stage kind of disappears, and we're left right next to the singer again as he sings the last words. And it's as if we've been caught up in the fantasy of that person, caught up in their imagination, in their memories first as a young boy, and then as if they're imagining themselves singing this song to a large crowd. But in the end, there is no crowd. There is just us and that person. So it feels like a good postscript to me on the album.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's exactly the kind of thing they were trying to go for with this song. It's interesting in that it's a postscript, but it's also kind of the thesis statement of the album. Mm-hmm. The whole line of he's not the kind you have to wind up on Sunday, which that's the central statement of the album, if there is one. For me personally, I wish it stayed intimate the whole time, and I know that would not give it the framing that they were trying to go for, but out of the middle section does nothing for me personally. I'd rather it just kind of stay small the whole time like that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But as it is a one more thing, as Ian wants to make his point again, then it does need that heavier part. Otherwise, the point will not be as well made, as forcefully stated.
Yeah, I don't have much more about this one. This was actually played live fairly frequently, which I think is kind of interesting because it's not a song I would have picked from this album to sort of be a live staple.
Interesting. I don't think I've noticed it being a popular live choice.
I think even as late as Songs from the Wood tour, they were still playing this song, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, this was a roller coaster of an episode. There's a lot packed in here. So as usual, I'm going to ask for your top 3 and bottom 3.
Difficult choice, because I could conceivably convince myself about every track on the album that it's my favorite one. Really, I could construct an argument why this particular track, including the shorter ones and the older ones. But I would say that my top 3 tracks, My God, Cross-Eyed Mary, and Mother Goose. and very, very difficult for me to pick a bottom track because I think that they're all pretty strong. And the only one to me that feels like probably like I could have conceivably skipped it, but again, I still think it's a banger. I think it's Hymn 43. That's my one bottom track.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna put it like that this time. What about you?
So I don't really feel that strongly about most of the songs on this album, which I think is sort of maybe what puts me out of line with a lot of maybe Tull fans who, I think most Tull fans like this album, but they think it's a bit overrated. My sort of reading is that's kind of the common consensus among Tull fans. And I generally agree. I mean, I think there's good things about this album. I think it's fine. But I just don't really feel super strong either way about most of the tracks on it. But that being said, my top 3 would definitely be Mother Goose, which is by far my favorite, I think, on the album. I would probably put Up to Me up there. I think that's a pretty strong one, and I like the lyrics a lot, and I think it does its job pretty well. And then a third one I would actually name Slipstream, just because I think it's really pretty, as short as it is, and I think it's sort of the prettiest song on the album aside from some parts on Mother Goose.
I love that you chose Slipstream. It doesn't get enough love.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I agree. It's not even really a song that I paid a lot of attention to until a couple of years ago, and I kind of rediscovered it. Bottom 3, the only 2 that I kind of feel strongly about, I would say My God is a definite bottom for me, which I know that may be painful for some people. And number 2, I would say Wind Up, just because the middle is just kind of boring and not interesting for me. Third one, I don't really want to pick a third one, but if I had to, I'd probably say Wond'ring Aloud, just because it's the one that's it's a little too cheesy and just doesn't do a lot for me.
Okay, it's cool that we agree on one song and really disagree on another. I think that kind of a dynamic that could stand a lot more album discussions.
So if you were to rank this one in comparison, where would you put it?
It's not one of my top Tull albums because I already mentioned that because of the general mood. But I really couldn't in good conscience put it anywhere lower than second tier for me.
Yeah, I more or less agree. I think it's like mid upper tier, if that makes sense. I like it. Again, like I've probably been harsh on some of the songs on this album in this episode, but I mean, in general, I think this is a good album. There's not a lot that drags it down, I think. I definitely don't think that it was necessarily deserving of all the praise that it gets from like the mainstream press. I think there's plenty of other Tull albums that are a lot better than this one.
Maybe it's more accessible.
Yeah, I think that's some of it. And I mean, we're not even really talking about the big songs a lot, like Aqualung and Locomotive Breath, which I think, as we said, I mean, my point of view is that, I mean, I think those songs are fine. I think they're good. I think they're not bad. But at this point, having heard them so many times, I just feel like there's not a lot more that I can say about them that haven't been said already. And, they're not, superstar tracks for me. I think they're just fine, for what they are.
Yeah, it did surprise myself that I had so much to say about Locomotive Breath, it not being one of my favorite tracks on the album. But I just had that observation, and I really wanted to take it as far as possible.
But it is interesting for me that, this one is lauded so much in the music world, and that for most people who are coming into Tull for the first time, this is the album they always want to hear because it's the one that's has survived the most, I guess, in like the cultural lexicon. But it's not the one that I would necessarily recommend to somebody if they asked me for a first Tull album to listen to.
It could work as a gateway album because it showcases so many things that Jethro Tull are good at without being overwhelming. Because if you show someone Thick as a Brick, this is just basically 40 minutes of one thing, that thing being incredibly diverse and incredibly engaging, but it still is a thing. You won't find a folky part on that album as much like Mother Goose, which is reminiscent, like you said, of Songs from the Wood.
Yeah, I think the thing that it accomplishes the best in like that regard for a casual audience is it's a good showcase of the electric and acoustic sides of the band.
Yeah.
But even that being said, I mean, I think there's albums that frankly do that better. Like, I mean, Minstrel in the Gallery comes to mind for that. I mean, I would say even Stand Up kind of comes to mind for that. I think, Stand Up is the album that I would recommend to some, like a total casual who's just getting into Tull, just because I think that's a better, more accessible album. But I mean, I totally agree that this can be an accessible gateway.
I'm not sure that I would recommend Stand Up as a gateway album because it does feel still early Tull. And you could, listening to Aqualung, you could then recognize these things in Thick as a Brick and in Minstrel and Songs from the Wood and the rest of the albums. While from Stand Up, it still feels like a huge jump to me. You wouldn't imagine that they would go there, while from Aqualung you would imagine that they could go there. From listening to My God with its different sections, from listening to the hard rocking and acoustic parts of Aqualung, the song.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way. But in speaking of the evolution of Tull, we're about to undergo a very big one with the next episode. Now we have to figure out how we're going to do the next episode, track by track. But I'm looking forward to that one. I hope it doesn't end up being 3 hours long, but we'll do our best. Well, thank you everybody for listening. As always, let us know what you're thinking. Leave us a review on the platform you're listening to. Those are very important for algorithms and helping us become even more popular on the internet. Send us an email at vernacularverbose@gmail.com. Leave us comments, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you like. We love to have discussions with you guys about the material and about what we're talking about. In the meantime, we'll see you on the next episode, Thick as a Brick. It's going to take us a while to prepare for that one, but we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
See you, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks.